Well, good morning. Join us is State Senator Scott Wiener of San Francisco, and we are here to celebrate San Francisco's and the state's resistance, not to the Trump administration, but to the #1 issue facing the state, housing. You authored a bill that was going to increase housing, particularly around transit hubs, increase density, try to get more affordable housing for what is perceived and repeatedly said is the state's #1 crisis. And it wound up quietly being shelved in committee for another year this week. What's going on?
Well, the bill is still alive, and if we can't reverse this decision to move it, in order to move it forward now, we'll move it forward in January. But housing is the #1 issue. The voters tell us that it's not even close. Voters understand it. And this bill, SB 50, 2 statewide polls in the last few weeks have shown 66% support and 61% support. Support in every region, support among every demographic. The people get it. And now we just need to make sure that elected leaders are hearing not just from the no growth, NIMBY, oppose everything people who run down to City Hall and yell, but just the regular people in our community who are struggling with housing and want their kids to have a housing future in our state. So this bill is alive. We're going to get it passed.
Okay, but the fact is that even with that 61% people saying they were for it.
66%.
66, we'll go 66. The leadership in the Senate decided not to take it to a vote. They are sitting on it. Now, you've already amended it. You did everything everybody wanted. You got it through 2 committees. So the question is, should the Senate be able to do this? Should 1 or 2 people be able to say the will of the people off to the side because our members aren't comfortable having to actually vote for this one way or the other?
Yeah, so just to be clear, obviously, I don't agree with the decision that was made. It was deeply disappointing to me. We have a big coalition that is advocating and pushing right now to try to change that position. I have a lot of respect for our leadership. I was an early supporter of the current leadership of the Senate. And the leadership is always balancing a lot of different needs and opinions, and I get that. But we're making the case
that be allowed to?
That this was a bad decision.
I know this is democracy. It's supposed to be. If we have a crisis and people want to change, why should 1 or 2 people decide it's not going to happen, especially when they go out and say they're in favor of it publicly?
We have the legislative structure we have, but what we need is the political will to move hard housing proposals forward that are going to actually lead to filling in the 3.5 million home shortage we have. So we just have to have the political will to move it forward. We are making the case now to try to change and reverse this decision. And if that doesn't happen, we're going to move it in January. We've already seen big city mayors, editorial boards, the governor expressing their disappointment about this decision. If we can't change it now, we will move this bill in January.
How do you do that if they don't want to let it out of committee?
Well, the President Pro Tem of the Senate has publicly stated that she's committed to working with us toward January, and I take her at her word on that. And she and I have a great relationship, and I am going to make sure that this moves forward in January.
Well, it'll be very interesting to see because in the past, we've seen this. It's a crisis. People need housing, but when people say it's coming to you, they say, not in my backyard. And I got the feeling that that is the message they're hearing in Sacramento. So what they say publicly is one thing. What they do privately is another. You'll see what happens come January. You making a bet on it?
I think we're going to pass this bill.
You see it on the streets, you see it in the alleys, you see it under the freeways. Homelessness. It is one of the biggest issues facing the state of California. That and mental health. Joining us this morning is Scott Wiener, who has taken some rather aggressive stands on this issue. But you've called for changes in the laws for more housing. You've called for changes in the law for more programs. You've even passed laws to try to make it easier to put people into mental health programs, even if they don't necessarily want to. My question is, still the numbers are going up. Is this a problem that we can actually legislate our way out of?
We absolutely can solve this problem, and the fact that the homeless numbers are spiking so dramatically in California, it shows that we have not had the political will so far to do what it takes. So fundamentally, most homeless people are not mentally ill or addicted to drugs. They are simply very poor and can't afford housing. And so until we aggressively resolve our housing problems, we're going to continue to see increases in homelessness. So that's number one. We have to fix the housing problem and make the hard choices. But we also have to restore the mental health and addiction safety net, and we have to be willing to help people even if they're not willing to help themselves for the extreme cases.
But we have this paradox in California where we say, we're going to provide this, we need to provide this. But whatever we're providing, whether it be affordable housing or something, always has this caveat in there, but only if you want it. In other words, we'll make more affordable housing, but only if your neighborhood wants it. Mm-hmm. We'll provide all of these programs, but you don't have to go into them, only if you want. And then we have people that basically just walk by them, yeah. And we're not getting anywhere.
Yeah, we have to. We don't
like hard choices.
Right, we have to reevaluate some of our basic assumptions in California. We've had a basic assumption for a long time that each neighborhood gets to decide whether it has any new housing. And then when you take that across the state, it's generated a 3.5 million home deficit. So we have to reevaluate that and have statewide standards on housing to make sure we have enough housing. We have had a basic assumption that of course, the old mental health hospitals were inhumane, and people were in there who didn't need to be in there. So instead of adjusting that, we just shut everything down and went to the opposite extreme, that people, it's all about voluntary services, which of course is ideal, but for those people who are incapable of accepting voluntary services, we just let them unwind and deteriorate and die on our streets. So we have to question that assumption as well. So we need to do some things fundamentally differently in California if we're going to move the dial on housing and homelessness.
I want to change gears with you a bit because we've had sort of like news coming in over the weekend, and this has to do with the Trump administration and the border and ICE detention centers. Yeah. We virtually eliminated detention centers in the Bay Area that were operating out of county jails, and now there is a move to reopen them because of the flood of people coming in at the borders. How do you think about that in California?
We don't want ICE detention centers in California. We have taken steps legislatively to stop our local cities and counties from engaging with ICE and housing these detention centers. If the federal government wants to come in and try to build new ones here, there are limits to our power, given the federal government has its own power, but we will do everything in our power to stop them from doing that and to make it hard for them to do it, because that's not what we want to be in California. This is a state that welcomes immigrants. We don't want to be about jailing immigrants.
Okay, but if we don't have the detention centers, they're going to be in Colorado, Arizona, Montana, Washington, and the people that are picked up here could wind up being separated from their families rather than by 5 miles, by 500 or 1,500 miles.
Yeah, I think the better solution is to have a rational immigration policy and to get back to the time where we actually allowed people to seek asylum in this country. I was down in Tijuana last month meeting with some of these refugees from Central America. These are people who had successful families and businesses in Central America, people who had jobs and they had an apartment. These were people who had real lives in Central America, and because of the severe violence and the threats to their children and to their own selves, they fled. These are not people who had no options in Central America. These are people who were successful, and they deserve to be able to apply for asylum here and not be kept in jail.
If the Trump administration goes ahead with this, can California stop it?
There are always ways that we can exercise our prerogative. The federal government is very powerful and they can override some of our laws, but there are always ways that we can bring our influence to bear, and we certainly don't want these detention centers, and we'll do everything in our power to stop them.
Okay, thank you for joining us this morning, State Senator Scott Wiener.